Merci Eric. Bonjour à tous. Hello everyone. Indeed, this presentation is meant to provide an overview of the first year of a project on aquifer and groundwater characterization in Southern Ontario. This project began in April 2024 in response to a request from a member of the Six Nations community to the federal government for assistance in addressing the poor quality of groundwater on the reserve. Since then, things have changed and we don't have access to the reserve, at least for the moment, but I'll come back to that later. So I'll skip the abstract for the presentation. This project involves many people from the federal government, from the Geological Survey of Canada, of course, but also from ECCC, from 3 provincial ministries, 4 universities, a consulting firm, the Hydrogeosphere Developers, and 2 First Nations communities. The study area corresponds to the lower part of the Grand River watershed, so about 2,000 square kilometers, with 2 First Nations reserves located in the middle, Six Nations, which is the largest reserve in Canada, and Mississaugas of the Credit, which is much smaller and located just next to it. The study area is much larger than the 2 reserves in order to properly understand the context and different water quality issues. These issues, in general, north of Lake Erie, are known to be caused both by natural sources and human activities, such as salts from the Salina group, de-icing salts, faulty septic systems, nutrients from agriculture, and leaks from potentially a few thousands of legacy oil and gas wells, because many of them were abandoned with the methods used at the time, sometimes a big tree trunk with some lead. So all these issues pose serious problems because some parts of the aquifers are gas-rich, or brackish, or contain other compounds, making sometimes groundwater unfit for consumption. Another health problem is related to the presence of H2S, a toxic gas, because as methane escaping from the deep hydrocarbon reservoirs migrates to the surface, it passes through an evaporite unit, the Salina group, likely causing sulfate reduction and the formation of H2S. The presence of H2S has led to 1 fatal accident and 1 explosion in the past few years, not specifically in the study area, but in this region. The people of the Six Nations reserves that we are working with have told us that many people living on the reserves would prefer to use groundwater rather than surface water for their water supplies. So we will try to help them better characterize the aquifers and hopefully find good quality drinking water. The study area and region in general is very agricultural, with some urban areas shown in red and forested areas shown in green, especially you can see on the reserves. A lot of people use groundwater in this area, as can be seen on this map. This is based on the provincial, mainly based on the provincial database from the water well records. So active water wells are shown in blue and abandoned wells in red. It may not be obvious on this map, but there are quite a few abandoned wells in the study area, certainly for a variety of reasons, including poor groundwater quality. As mentioned earlier, there is a fairly large number of oil and gas wells in the region. Within the study area, they are mostly located in the northwestern part, and especially in the southeastern part. Only on the reserves, there are 250 that we know of that are in the database, and the the reserves cover only less than 200 square kilometers. There are about 5 times more abandoned than active oil and gas wells, mainly because a large part of them were drilled in the 19th century or the beginning of the 20th century. This map shows the shallow bedrock units with the evaporite unit, the Salina group, shown in yellow. Most of the oil and gas wells have been drilled south of the northern boundary of the Salina group because this group forms or act as a regional seal that retains hydrocarbons below it. In this region is mainly natural gas, so mainly methane. Sorry. This map illustrates the superficial sediment units. As you can see, a very large part of the study area is covered with fine-grained sediments, shown in light blue. So they are a little permeable, so that's great. They protect groundwater from surface contamination, but they do not favor infiltration. Sediments and thus permeability are more varied in the western part. The objectives of this project are first to understand groundwater flow in the study area. This involves characterizing the properties of shallow aquifers and the other units in general, and integrating the knowledge gained in 2D and 3D coupled numerical models, including eventually predictive models, notably for climate change scenarios. And the second objective is to study the impact of natural and anthropogenic contaminants on the region's water resources. And this involves characterizing the quality of surface water and groundwater, as well as using air and soil measurements to better identify the sources of contaminants. As part of the second objective, a study of the history of the landscape and environmental changes over the few decades, the past decades, and the impacts on culture, health, and lifestyle and quality of life is being conducted based on interviews and discussions with members of the two First Nations communities. This study is being supervised by a member of the Six Nations community who is a professor at McMaster University, and the work is mainly being conducted by her postdoc. This map shows the provincial monitoring wells with larger dots and wells sampled for geochemistry by the Ontario Geological Survey with smaller dots. In both cases, some wells are completed into superficial sediments and others in bedrock. These databases are amazing and will greatly help us. As for fieldwork this year, we intend to drill a few monitoring wells, but they will have to be drilled outside the reserves because the ethics committee told us recently that our project was refused. So we will drill monitoring wells, but elsewhere in the study area and probably mostly close or around the reserves, focusing mainly on two aspects, refining subsurface architecture of deposits between prominent and buried moraine systems, and improving the spatial coverage of monitoring and sampled wells. So we will core drill monitoring wells at 3 or 4 sites, and each site will have 2 wells, twin wells, one completed into superficial sediments or at the interface with bedrock, and the other well into bedrock. If possible, in the well formation that is located below the Salina group, and that is more favorable for good drinking water. During drilling, superficial sediments and rock will be sampled, and a borehole geophysical survey will then be carried out, and later groundwater will be sampled. We also want to carry out a survey using a thermal camera to locate and then eventually estimate preferential discharge into streams, and hopefully a follow-up to a pilot study that I will talk about in a few minutes can take place using a drone mounted magnetometer to try to locate with fairly precisely casings of legacy oil and gas wells. So we've been working on a database over the past few months, and in fact, Matt Pine, that is on the line that I saw, that's his work. These data mainly come from the provincial database, the water well records. And there's a lot of validation that still needs to be done. It's going to be a long job. So today I will only present preliminary statistics and piezometric maps. In this study area, there are about 14,000 wells that have been drilled between 1921 and almost today. And for the moment, these wells have been divided into 3 categories according to if the wells were completed into superficial sediments at the interface between superficial sediments and bedrock, and well into bedrock. According to this classification, we can see that there are many more wells that are drilled or completed into superficial sediments compared to the 2 other categories. However, the mean well depth is always very shallow, increasing from 12 to 30 meters, and the same for the static water levels that increase from 5 to less than 8 meters. But of course, there can be large variations, as you can see from the box plots. With regard to reserves in particular, the median well depths and the median static water levels are very similar to those for the entire study area, but the percentage of wells completed into superficial sediments is even higher. I just want to point out that the y-axes are very different for both areas, mainly because there are 10 times fewer wells on the reserves, which are 10 times smaller than the whole study area. We learned that most residents on the reserves use their dug wells as cisterns that are regularly filled with water trucks, likely due to poor groundwater quality. However, a study conducted by a professor at McMaster University testing tap water and water from these cistern wells that often have cracked concrete show that quality limit and criteria are very often exceeded. Different piezometric or potentiometric maps were developed according to the types of wells, but they all look very similar and very similar to the topographic map that I included for comparison, of course, because static water levels are very shallow and groundwater follows the topography. Many water wells inside or close to the study area have elevated values of dissolved sulfate. Most of these wells are located in this central area shown with the red rectangle that I will call the corridor. This area is characterized by a thin till, and the topography is low, and these values are regardless of the bedrock unit. Some of these wells have abnormally low delta 34S values, and these are thought to be derived from upward migration of dissolved sulfates from the terrestrial Queenston Formation. I'll come back to that in a minute. In some cases, when wells contain sulfates and when there's methane that is present due to the presence of a leaky nearby oil and gas well, H2S will be produced. So work on this abnormal sulfate and on H2S given its importance, has been carried out over the past few years, first by OGS, the Ontario Geological Survey, and now as part of this project with OGS and Matrix Solutions. Deep lithoprobe seismic and aeromagnetic surveys have identified faults that are rooted in the Precambrian basement, and some of which cut the entire Paleozoic platform. These faults are mainly restricted to this corridor where very depleted isotopic values of sulfates have been found. So these faults could act as localized upward migration pathways for deep brines. In addition, modern earthquake epicenters in the region confirm seismic activity and thus possible movement along some of the faults. To test the hypothesis of upward migration of dissolved sulfates from the Queenston Formation through faults in a process similar to that of hydrothermal fluids, two types of analyses will be used. First, clumped isotopes on carbon and oxygen from dolomite samples of the Guelph Formation. And second, hog pyrolysis of organic matter from the matrix of the Salina group inside and outside the corridor. These two independent approaches will help us identify potential temperature anomalies inside the corridor. A pilot study was conducted last fall in the Six Nations community at two sites using a drone-mounted magnetometer. The objective was to see whether this technique could detect and locate with reasonable accuracy the presence of steel casings of abandoned and decommissioned oil and gas wells. These sites had both a wooded area and a bare field, and the drone flew at a maximum altitude of 35 meters. So the results or the interpretation show that the legacy oil and gas wells could be relatively precisely located. So that's very good. And so the goal is now to try to conduct a much larger scale survey to try to detect or locate multiple legacy oil and gas wells where we would like to sample air and soil. Last slide, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the progress that we have made over the past few months, but more on the administrative side. So we were able to hire two PhD students, one that began last January at the University of Guelph, and that is working on hydrodynamics. And the second will work on geochemistry and will be at INRS, and she should come in September. We're in the process of hiring a technician, and hopefully this person will be able to begin soon because we were able to secure funding for the drilling of a few monitoring wells, as I mentioned in the presentation, and this work should take place in late August or in September. We also worked on an ethics committee form because in order to work with the Six Nations community, we need to fill out a form that contains many questions to make sure that they understand what we are planning to do and that we are respectful. So there's a special section on the OCAP principles. For those of you who may not be familiar with this, these are principles that we must respect when working or doing a research study with a First Nations community. OCAP stands for ownership, control, access, and possession. So it's really about data and results and how we share them and who owns them. For this, we worked with the Intellectual Property Division, the Legal Service, and Nukwi-Wash, and we had many iterations. And for the moment, we haven't been able to reach an agreement with the Ethics Committee, but we are exploring different ways to progress. And finally, we developed a project flyer that we will distribute during fieldwork. Thank you very much.